Okay, this is a day late. Well, yeah, I shouldn't say a day late because I've been a day late many times. Been a day late and a dollar short a couple times. But I'm not going to use my intro music here because a friend of mine, who I consider a friend now, that I hunted with, he was at a conference and he was learning about AI. He's not in this genre of podcasting, but he made a song through AI, and I assume he wrote the lyrics, or AI wrote the lyrics, or he put in keywords. But you know what? I really liked it. I really liked it. So instead of my normal intro going like bird, 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 wrong name was not. Instead of that, we are getting this.
Tucked in the hills where shadows run deep. Dog on the trail, waking birds from their sleep. The sun burns gold on horizon so wide. With a shotgun in hand, my brother's by my side. It's feathers in the wind, a dog's steady pace. The laughter of my friends in this rugged wild space. A cold beer in the evening, the warmth of a cigar, chasing grouse through the pines, and the pheasant afar. Footfalls crunch on the sage-covered ground. A flush of wings breaks the silence profound. Well, dart like arrows, chew cars take flight. Each moment a treasure in this hunter's delight. It's feathers in the wind, a dog's steady pace. The laughter of my friends in this rugged wild space. A cold beer in the evening, the warmth of a cigar, chasing grouse through the pines, and the pheasant afar. The West holds its secrets, its freedom untamed. Each hunt tells a story, each canyon a name. We'll toast by the fire under stars shining clear, to the game and the kinship we hold so dear. It's feathers in the wind, a dog's steady pace. The laughter of my friends in this rugged wild space. A cold beer in the evening, the warmth of a cigar, chasing grouse through the pines, and the pheasant afar. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I cut that off a little short. I didn't know how to dial it down. But anyway, I thought that was fun. That was great. I can't believe, I don't know how people do this stuff. I wish I could do this stuff. Then you'd have to listen to it every week if I made a new song. So we're just going to go right into, the title sponsor of this show is OnX. You can get your OnX Elite subscription for 20% off with HDP. You can get Gunner Kennels. Well, patrons can get a discount on Gunner Kennels. W Supply, Garmin, K9 Athlete, 25% off your first order with the promo code K9 Athlete. If you can't spell it, too bad. You're not going to get 25% off. Mossberg, Boss Shot Shells, Purina Pro Plan, Walton's, Marshwear, Arxis USA, Four Wheel Campers, Watermark Brewery, which I'm having a beer they called Leisure right now. I just poured my second draft. So it's the first beer they made. I think it was one of them that they won an award with when they were just working out of their garage. And I've got to, hang on a minute. It's so good. Oh my God. It's so good. Yeah, and American Field magazine. Have you seen a new American Field? If you were one of the people who used the promo code Hunting Dog Podcast, you would have had your first issue of American Field in your hands, getting ready to salivate over next season. Well, Oh, I forgot to tell you. Marshware HDP 15 for you listeners, Walton's HDP 10, and of course, my patrons get bigger discounts, deeper discounts on those people who offer discounts. That's just what they do for patrons. And we had a great Zoom room last Thursday. I wanted it to last 2 hours, and it lasted 3.5. I think at the end there was about 6 of us on the Zoom room, and it was a long night. We covered a lot of subjects, though. A lot of fun. So thanks to everybody that came out. Thanks to all the patrons that come on. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you're a patron, once a month, we do a Zoom room. We get on there, maybe usually about 30 of us, somewhere in that neighborhood. And people stop by. They have a drink. They have a question. They got a training question. We announced a dove hunt that we're going to do for patrons. We announced a South Dakota hunt that we're going to do that we're looking for some more patrons for. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, that's it. So this was with my, I will call him a friend. I've hung around with him enough and drank a few beers with him. Land Tawney, formerly from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and he is working on a new project, and it is in the same vein, but it's got a different, what would you call it? It's in the same vein, but it's got a different superpower, right? Because their organization, anyway, you'll hear all about it. We talk a little bit about dogs and hunting season, but we talk a lot about land advocacy and kind of what's been going on here. It's not good. And I'm not talking about the administration and cutting jobs. I'm talking about public land sales that are a lot of states are facing right now. To balance the budget, we're going to sell off our public lands. I don't think that's a great idea. Yeah, do I got 20, 30 years left in the fields? Nope. But you might. So pay attention. I hope you enjoy this. Talk to you soon.
Going. All right. That means everything we say can be held against us in a court of law. I'm on the phone on a Zoom phone call with Land Tawney. And Land I met quite a few years ago through BHA, and recently found out that I knew he had stepped back from BHA and put it in the hands of Patrick Berry. And Patrick's been on the podcast, and he's a fellow flushing dog enthusiast like I am. And so we got along famously. And well, you're a flushing dog enthusiast too, Land. You have a lab, which is definitely a flushing dog.
Yep, I got a black lab. She's 8 and one of my best friends.
That the older we get, they're going to become better friends too.
It's like a handful, right? At least I got one dog that will always love me.
Right. The friends will still give you a hard time. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so you went into a whole new venture after stepping down from BHA. So give us a little, what they say, 30,000-mile view of what's going on with you.
Yeah. So, I loved my time at BHA, right? I just loved my time there, and I loved the people probably most. The people, from all across North America that really were the heart of BHA. And so, it was hard for me to step back, but I wanted to spend some time with my family. I also, was CEO for 10 years, and that's a long run for a CEO position. And so I think it was, important to have somebody with different perspective come in there. But, it's still, I saw some folks down in Arizona this last weekend that, I hadn't seen for a while. And it was, it's like a reunion every time I see folks, from that volunteer kind of base, and just great people. So I stepped back. I did hang out with my family a ton. I've got 2 young kids. My daughter is 16. My son just turned 14. Went on an epic float trip with my son last spring. We did a bunch of stuff this summer together, chased crawfish up at my mom's lake place. I've been slowing down. I think I didn't know how much stress was on me, I guess, with a job like that and growing so fast that we did at BHA. And when you take that away, I think one of the things that I found most is I was present, you and I could be having a conversation about something, and I hate to say this, but I'm probably solving like 2 or 3 things, in my brain while we're talking. And I'm trying to be present with you, but I wasn't. And then when you take that away, and then you realize what present is. So I'm very thankful for that in a lot of ways. But I'm also somebody that has a really hard time sitting on the sidelines.
Right. Right.
And I, before I came to BHA, I did some work, like political work, and I'd kind of missed that work. And then, we have an election this fall, and I started looking at the pressures that were on our public land, and not just, at the presidential level or administration level, but also at a congressional level. And a friend of mine who I'd done some work with in the past, we decided to really, put some effort towards a different kind of organization, and that is American Hunters and Anglers. And this is something he started, a few years back, never really put much energy into. So it's been sitting there, but it's a different designation than a C3, which is what Pheasants Forever is what BHA is, it's what Trout Unlimited is, like Mule Deer
Right.
Foundation, etc. And while those organizations, I think, like absolutely have a place, and a lot of that's habitat delivery, but it's also, creating opportunities for education, and then
Mhm.
they do, some lobbying as well, but they're limited in their lobbying. It's only 20% of their overall budget. And so what that means is, like, if you make $1 million in a year, you can only spend $200,000 on lobbying. And so
Even if your plan, even if you wanted to put it all toward it,
totally,
you just can't. You just
you
can't.
can't do it legally. Like, that's the IRS designation.
Yeah.
And so there's that limitation. Then the other one is that they don't want C3s getting involved in elections. And
Oh,
so and I think that sometimes there's a gray area there, like the NRA, is a C3, and you definitely know where they sit. But with a C4, you can do unlimited lobbying. So you could do that every single day. And then in an election year or any kind of electioneering activities, that has to be only up to 49% of your overall budget. So as long as you're spending 51% on the lobbying side of things, or the educating kind of side of things and
right.
grassroots engagement, then you can spend 49% on elections. And so it's something I've done in here in Montana, but we really thought, this friend of mine, Barrett Kaiser, and I were like, let's do something nationally. And so really we started that in January. And the idea is to really tell the people what is going on a daily basis. We're trying to be, work at the speed of politics. I mean,
Yeah.
if people are paying attention, what's happened here in the last
I don't
like
know if
three
you can
months.
work it. I don't know if you can keep up that speed, but God bless you for trying.
Well, I mean, it is kind of like, it's like a marathon. There's a sprint pretty much every single day, but you got to remember that this is, you have to be kind of paying attention all the time.
Right.
And so operate the speed of politics, really kind of direct messaging to the people, utilizing social media. Half of the people are getting their news now on social media. And while that is super frustrating to me because it's not, as in-depth or necessarily ground truth, it is what it is. And so are you
Right.
going to, participate in that, or are you going to complain about it? And we decided to really participate.
Yeah.
So forward facing, kind of media driven. We have our own podcast that we did a pilot of, and so that's going to be another part of what we do. But really, it's going to be focused on Instagram, and then I'm not a TikTok guy at all, but we've done some stuff on TikTok, and that's seems to be gaining some legs there. And it's really to provide kind of this spot for, I would call it the radical middle, Ron. And
Hmm.
so you have, 10% on the far left, you have 10% on the far right, and they seem to be the ones that are garnering all the attention.
Oh
Where the
yeah.
majority of America and the majority of hunters, I would say, are in this radical middle, where I think we agree upon 95% of probably the same stuff, but we just don't have people speaking, to us. And so I think really that radical middle and trying to help. Another thing I guess I would say is that, we're trying to create opportunities for folks like BHA or Trout Unlimited to be in these closed doors. You're smoking a cigar right now, but like, and there's that old thing, these things happen in closed doors, smoking cigars. And I've been in those rooms before, and we'll be in those rooms again. But we are operating in a place where they aren't necessarily going in there in a great negotiating place, right? And so
Mhm.
the negotiations maybe start over on the right-hand side or on the left-hand side. We're trying to make those negotiations happen more in the middle. And so that's going to be good for all Americans, I would say, all hunters and anglers.
Yeah.
And we've done that. We we thought you kind of do two things. I've been a part of the start of a lot of organizations, and you can go out, build a plan, do all the things that you can do to, like, how are we going to build this thing? And then you can go talk to funders, individuals, etc., and try to raise that money, which I've done before. or you can go out and just start doing. And we decided to like just start doing. And so we started that in January, really that first, second week in, no, second week of January. And we've been like, there's that old saying, like building it, building the plane while you're flying it. And that's partly kind of what we're doing.
Yeah.
But we've got four like just super rock stars. And so we're a small team, which, again, I love working with BHA and all the volunteers and all the staff over there. But once we got bigger, I had less work that I was doing that was connected, like what we're doing on the ground. I was more managing and trying to raise
Right.
money.
Yeah.
And so this gives me an opportunity to get my conservation hands dirty again and really be involved in policy and kind of on the front lines. And we call ourselves the front lines on the war on kind of public lands, which I absolutely think that we are. And so creating space for other NGOs to have conversations, but then I also think like, helping drive that narrative, that making it okay to like hold some of these folks accountable. I think one of
Yeah.
the most frustrating things that I have is that, the sportsman's community doesn't necessarily like to hold people accountable publicly. And I think, in this sphere that we're in right now, I think people do need to be held accountable publicly. And that means both, thanking and spanking. So that's like my 30,000 foot, and I talk way too long on that, but I think
Well,
that,
no, I mean, I kind of, I heard you say it before when I heard you on a podcast. That's why I said I got to get Land to come on here and teach me a little bit about it. And I've always said, I was the guy that went hunting, and I didn't even. You'll hear people say that, oh, they bought a hunting license and they thought they were helping with conservation. Well, I mean,
right,
to a degree,
right,
but really, that a guy my age, that was my mindset until probably around when maybe right around when BHA started putting out letters and like making those easy things to click on and call your congressman and stuff.
yeah,
I went for 30 some years just going like going hunting, you know, going hunting. Don't didn't it literally never the advocacy part of it never, you know, ring the bell with me. And I'm not saying I think about this for my grandkids. I mean, they're gonna have to fight for it themselves.
totally.
You're not gonna be able to do something this week or this year that guarantees my grandkids or your grandkids anything. It's
No
it's
way.
continuous fight. But I think the more we get, like one of the things I always, I do a lot of stuff with PF and with RGS,
Yeah.
which, like you
Two
said,
great
they're
organizations.
great. I love them. And it drives me nuts when we do if you did the statistics of how many grouse hunter, how many people that take there is no, there are a lot of farm raised pheasants, but there are no farm raised rough grouse, right?
Right.
And if you take the amount of people out there that take even one a year purposely on a hunt, and then the amount of those people that are members of the one habitat organization, it's like that's the spank I want to give. You know what I mean? Like,
Totally.
I can't believe that even if somebody says to me, "Oh, I don't want to go to a banquet and I don't want to donate," I'm like, for Pete's sakes, there's one group, working on your behalf. And to be ignorant of that is these days is kind of unacceptable, I think. And so I love when I started getting emails from BHA. Of course, Mr. Callahan made me a life he held a gun to my head and made me be a life member. I don't know if that was the tactic he should have took, but there was it wasn't held to my head, it was held near my ear. And but that was the first time I started getting an email and going, okay, I will call that 202 number in Washington.
Yep.
And your organization is going to do the same kind of thing, but without what chapters and memberships? How does that going to is it?
Yep. And I'm gonna like just respond to something you said too, is I think that buying a license, buying hunting equipment, right? Like our hunting equipment is taxed. That goes back to the state agencies through Pittman Robertson. You're buying a license. That is great. That next step is what you talk about, is belonging to an organization. And it's crazy to me how many hunters don't belong, as you described, that are
Yeah.
especially grouse. And I don't even know what their membership is. Let's say it's $35. Like, come on, man. Like you're gonna spend that, like you're gonna spend way more than that when you go out to dinner. And it's like all
Exactly.
these things that you get and they're advocating for to step up. And then the next piece of that is like how do you engage the people, right? And I think that's like super important. And
Hmm.
so For us, I think part of this too, and you kind of said this, is that we're really trying to educate people on where this came from, right? Like I think sometimes hunters are, they just don't know, and so they think that all this stuff has always been the way it is because that's just the right thing to do. But, there's been fights that have been happening since the late 1800s to give us what we have right now in the United States, which is, this vast estate of public lands, wildlife that belong to the people. It's
Yeah.
that North American kind of wildlife conservation model. And the more that you teach people on kind of how we got there, they understand that these were individual actions. They're taken by, sure, like Theodore Roosevelt or Aldo Leopold or Rachel
Right.
Carson, or, the list goes on. But there was tens of thousands of people that helped them do that we don't know the names of, right? And so
Right.
I
Right.
think once you find that out, you feel part of something. And then you said, but I think it's frustrating to some people sometimes, but I totally agree, is that your grandkids are going to have to fight for this in 15, 20, 30, 40 years. Like this
Yeah.
is not something that you solve. This is something that you are a part of and that you kind of massage and make sure that, you look at the past, but then also think about what it looks like in the future. And so, for us, a lot of that is education, about where we came from. Like, and I love the social media stuff. We did one on Ding Darling, who did the first duck stamp.
Yep.
And you
Yep.
tell this story in like 90 seconds because that's all people have, right? And I think
Right.
that is fun and awesome. And then hopefully they can, come on a podcast and get more in depth and learn more about that stuff.
Right.
But if you got to educate people, so that's kind of, what we're doing. And then I think, with the calls to action, we can do that every single day. We are not limited by those lobbying caps. And so, when stuff is going on, you're going to see us all the time and being, again, there's four of us. We all kind of come from, like advocacy slash political backgrounds. And so we can get stuff done super, super fast,
Yeah.
and get that out to the people because, when the people know, like a lot of people, I talk to and have for years think their voice doesn't count anymore, right? And in a lot of ways they're right. Like corporations are people, because of the
Yeah.
Citizens United like case.
Yeah.
And so they have a lot of say in our political sphere, but the people, democracy is still run by the people, and you just got to raise up, and give them opportunities and push back against, some stuff
Yeah.
that we'll talk about today that's happening that is horrible and could change the trajectory of what you and I've been doing forever. And these kids, they're never going to get exactly back what we had. And so
Right. Yeah. Once you put
that's
the
the fight.
mall in, you're not going to play in that field anymore.
No, no. I
You
mean,
know?
once it's
Gone.
gone,
Gone.
and they want to. I think Hal Herring, I don't know if you know Hal Herring, but
Right.
like Hal Herring said that we're sitting, here in the United States, we're sitting on some of the most untapped wealth in the world, right? When it comes to public lands. And the idea of that is like that, like the real estate that comes along with that. And
Right.
so what's nice is that you and I and everybody else in America owns 640 million acres of public land, which means that the federal government manages that for us, but like Ron, we live like royalty, I can't like I grew
Right.
up here in Montana. My family's been here for 5 generations, but we didn't have a ranch. I have friends that have ranches,
Right.
and I go on those ranches, and I'm very
Probably didn't
thankful.
even, you didn't even need a ranch though. You had,
No, and that's
oh,
kind of the point, right?
yeah.
Like, is that we
Yeah.
all have this, and I think that one of the tenets of the North American model is the democracy of the hunt, which means that everybody can do it. Well, you
Yeah.
start to privatize things, and that's where leasing comes in, and you price out a lot of people pretty quickly. On public lands, that's not the case, and so
Yeah.
to me, that's it's one that they're gonna have, like again, my kids, their kids are gonna have to fight for. But I think it's a just cause and couldn't be anything more than democratic. There's nothing I think that's more American than our public lands.
Well, I before we got on, I pulled up my other laptop over here and I had and I've heard people say this and I looked up the map of it and I was like, "Oh yeah, it is a Western thing, but there's plenty of this land. It's just in the east, there's plenty I got plenty of places to roam around and go look for a rough grouse rest of my life, right?
Totally.
But I may not be able to go somewhere else and do it. So where my question's going to is the BLM portion. I mean, I looked this up, like 245 million of those acres. So
Yep.
less
Bureau of
than
Land Management.
is BLM, right?
Yep. Yep.
Is that the low hanging fruit that's going on now? Is it the BLM or is that the public land that's it got the bullseye on their back, the target
I
on their
mean,
back.
I think all public lands have the bullseye on their back, right? Like Secretary Burgum, who is in charge of the Interior, he's the Secretary of Interior. So that means he has Bureau of Land Management, it means he has national parks, he has U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, like lands underneath him.
Yeah.
Also, some others, but those are the main ones. And like he said when he got in, he said national parks, we're not going to touch those. Okay, so we'll take those off. And then wilderness areas we're not going to touch, but every single thing else is on the table and they're
Ooh,
part of the balance sheet. Okay. When I hear the word balance sheet, which is,
that's
yesterday, they're talking about balancing the budget with public lands. Like that is like ridiculous to me. And so I think they're all, Forest Service is under the Department of Agriculture. So that's Secretary of Agriculture. So that's different. But they're looking at these lands as part of the balance sheet. And what that means is either selling them or exploiting them.
right.
And I think, timber harvest, oil and gas development, mineral development, that needs to happen on our public lands. And it absolutely does. But when
And it,
Roosevelt set aside, well, go ahead.
oh, it's been happening since its inception.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's
Yeah,
never been, besides wilderness areas and
right,
national parks, it's never been don't touch them. It's just let's think about that word conservation, which
right.
means let's do the best for that land for the most amount of people for the longest amount of time. And so if you want to do, let's say, oil and gas development, that's not energy domination. That's energy like I would say conservation. So you figure out how you can take enough gas out but then you do that in phased ways, and so that doesn't have the huge impact that energy dominance would, which is like a short-term game for a long-term impact. And so
Yeah.
you ask about the Bureau of Land Management lands. So these were established later. They were established in the 80s, and it really was kind of these lands that had not been designated by anything else. And so when you say low-hanging fruit, yes, that's what that's what the Utah lawsuit was about. So the
Yeah.
Utah petitioned the Supreme Court to take 18 million acres of public land that is Bureau of Land Management land in their state, and they wanted to take that over and manage it themselves. Well, Utah has already sold 50% of the land that they got when they became a state, and they want to sell more, which in some ways I understand, but again, that's not their land, that's our land, and we the
Right.
people should decide what happens to that. Thank goodness the Supreme Court said no, but that will come back. But Bureau of Land Management lands, I got stuff that's on the Blackfoot Valley or Blackfoot River. River runs through it. The famous movie is just outside of Missoula where I live. And there's Bureau of Land Management there. It's right along the river. Majority of that though is like out in eastern Montana and these like more rural areas.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about places to go hunt birds, that
Right.
those are like amazing spots. And so, I think folks want to either exploit them or have them for themselves. And that's just not, the system that we set up. That changes the whole trajectory
Right.
of that democracy of the hunt. So they are the low-hanging fruit, but they're just like that camel's nose underneath the tent.
Right. So it doesn't mean that if God forbid they got their way, they could keep getting it's a slippery slope, right?
Ab
If they start
Absolutely.
manipulating that, they're okay, well, you know what, we don't need, yeah, they're probably going to have a hard time messing with Yellowstone. But there's
Right.
probably a lot of other places that they could mess with or encroach in or yeah, the fact that it's kind of like somebody telling you, let's change the Constitution. Well, it was pretty well written. You know? Like, and really, I mean, I am no political scholar, but it, anybody I've heard that, like on a podcast talks about the Constitution, it's like, guys were geniuses, right?
Yeah.
So if this is the way it's been and the public land is it's our land, how does it even, how does a guy even come up and go, I got an idea. Let's let's buy it as a state and let's take it. I mean, how do they even do that? I it almost seems like that's like me saying, I'd like to change the First Amendment. And all they're gonna be like, get out of here.
Right.
But there's probably somebody out there that could get the point across and get it to a court case. You know?
I mean, the thing that I think for you to consider is again that kind of like that thinking from Hal Herring. This is all about money, right?
Yeah.
This is
I was
about
just
money. And you mentioned Yellowstone. Okay, we're not going to mention Yellowstone, but there's Bureau of Land Management lands and there's Forest Service lands that are around Yellowstone. Wouldn't
Right.
it be awesome to have some of that land and put a lodge on there either for yourself or for a money-making opportunity? I would say sure. But then that's not a place that you and I can go anymore, right?
Right.
And so like there's this, and I can't afford that stuff by the way anyways. And so
I don't think anybody can anymore. Land.
no, and so who's going to like benefit from this, right? You know, and they're talking right now about utilizing public lands for affordable housing, right? Affordable housing is a crisis definitely in this country. There's, you know,
Right.
many people that can't afford to have a house, and so they want to use public lands, but to try to help solve that problem. But what you do then is that goes to developers, and I guarantee you that development is not going to be 100%, affordable housing. There's going to be a small portion that's going to be there. It's going to be money
Right.
made by those developers for little
Oh, yeah.
ranchettes and trophy houses. And so I think, with that housing crisis, this is getting way into the weeds, but there's a bill or there's a law that's on the books. It's called the Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act. And so what that does is it does facilitate the sale and or transfer of public lands. What they use that for is when you have, either a checkerboard situation of public land and private, or you have let's say, a corridor along a river that has public and private, or you have, a trail that you want to like extend that makes it easier to manage and just like that connectivity for the people is better. This fund or this law, excuse me, can be used to do that on a very finite way where you and I and every other American has the ability to to scrutinize those decisions.
Right.
And then when that stuff is sold, if it's sold, that money goes into an account that stays in that account to go help purchase other public land to make again, make that stuff better and like make things more connected. And so it doesn't go into, pay off this budget, which is what they're trying to do now. And so there's already a spot there. And so when I hear them, again, Secretary Burgum got together with the HUD Secretary, Housing and Urban Development Secretary, and this is their grand idea. I'm like, man, if you want to do that, let's have that conversation over here. But when you're saying it over here, all this is again this idea that you're floating this balloon to see if it's okay, so you can take
Right.
more of it. And if we're gonna, I mean, and I'm going off on a tangent a little bit, but if let's say like you could sell, a bunch of these public lands, which you could for millions of dollars to help offset the budget. That's a one-time freaking deal, man. Like that's a one-time deal. Doesn't look at the outdoor economy. That's 100 or what's it? It's $1 trillion a year is the outdoor economy.
Right.
Public lands is the basis of that. And so that's something that's sustainable, can go on for the future versus like this short-term game to like quote unquote, balance the budget. And so
Yeah. Balancing a
um
budget without a real long-term plan isn't balancing a budget. That's just,
no, it's
just
like if you're, it's like at your house, right? Like, let's say, like, you got to drive to work every single day, right? And you got your truck out there, and you get into some financial trouble, and you're like, well, I'm just going to sell my truck. Well, now you can't drive to work anymore, right? So that
right.
you just
Right.
lost your opportunity to make any kind of money. And
Yeah.
so, and I just made that one up on the fly. Hopefully that works for you. But, um, it's very short-sighted. And again, it's all about a few people making a bunch of money, and that would be the developers that would be developing this land.
Yeah, that's a scary, when you put it that way, it's and the amount of people that have the money that would do that, there's no lack of them.
No,
But
no,
there's how many hunters we have roughly in the country? I don't know. What do we got?
15 million, I think.
15 million? There ain't 15 million people that can buy that land away. So there's more of us than there is of them, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, getting that word out, I mean, do you feel in your like optimistic land Tawney heart that if we could all increase our advocacy just by a little bit and make those, you think we could get that point across, or are we trying to jump off Niagara Falls and be the one that doesn't die in the barrel?
I love that.
Because I'll help as much as I can. I'll answer the emails and I'll call up my Washington. But
Yeah.
God, we got to get that. We need a lot of us to do it.
So in my 25-year career, I've never seen it this bad.
Really.
And when I talk to people that have been around, twice as long as that, they've never seen it this bad. So the threats are dire right now.
Yeah.
But what I would say to you is that threats have been dire before. With early 1900s when we were doing a lot of market killing before the Lacey Act, to put feathers in women's hats, to put food on tables, to put furs on people's shoulders. Like we were kicking the shit out of wildlife all across this country. It was bad news.
Right.
And so Lasiac was established, right? And then you go to like the Dirty 30s and the lid's coming off the prairie because of the Dust Bowl. And you
Yeah.
get the Duck Stamp, you get National Wildlife Federation, you get Ducks Unlimited, you know? I think I say those things because out of like troubling times can come some good. And
Yeah.
so with this being the largest threats I think that I've ever seen, or most credible threats that I've ever seen, there's rallies happening all over the country, you know, and you know we had one here in Montana at our state capital that had 2,000 plus people. Idaho had one at their state capital, 2,000 plus people. I was
Right.
just in Arizona and Phoenix. They had their first ever public lands rally. They had about 400 people there. I mean, the people are starting to pay attention because they're worried, and I hate that, right? Like fear drives like kind of sometimes engagement. But that's where we're at right now. And so I think a silver lining of all this is this coalescing of people and coming together and telling these elected officials, because they're there to serve us, on what we want and what we don't want. And what we don't want, you know, is this mass sale of public lands. What we want is to like basically have it the way it is right now with some tweaks to make it better, which I think
Right.
there's plenty of things that we can do to make our public lands management better.
Right.
But the way it's being done, I mean, is just it's not in a sustainable fashion, and it
Yeah.
is really, I think they're doing three things. They're trying to dismantle our public lands. That was the purge of all those federal employees, right? Like that 10% with another 10% on top of that on
Hmm.
these agencies that are already underfunded and understaffed. So you're dismantling them, and so that, oh, we can't manage them anymore. Then you're defunding them, right? And so they don't have as much money to do their jobs.
Yeah.
Ultimately, for that last D, which is divestiture, which is just a fancy way to sell them off. And
Right.
so like that is systematically happening. And you know, there's folks that have been working on this for a long time, like Senator Lee from Utah, William Perry Penley, who was from Wyoming, but then you know was also the Bureau of Land Management director of all things for a while. Um, they want to sell all public lands, and they're just like they're this trajectory is going in that direction. But we, the people, can change that, and I wholeheartedly believe in the people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you go back to, I'm a bit older than you, and
No.
yeah, yeah, everybody knows
I
that.
turned 50 tomorrow, dude. A big, big, momentous birthday. We'll talk
Oh,
about that.
early happy birthday. I'm old enough to be your father. Now,
You don't
granted,
look it.
I would have had to reproduce at age 17, but I could have done.
You could have.
There's been younger baby daddies out there. But other than to get, you know, what's funny, they might think about it. My
We
gap,
might be related. The
right,
diastema, dude. The gap teeth.
right. But as I got older, it closed up. Mine was as big as yours when I was about 30.
No way. Well, I
Yeah.
hope that, you know, I'm able to maintain this into the future.
Um, but anyway, like I get on this conversation with the conservation organizations I work with.
Yeah.
Um, when the Clean Water Act came up, you know, that was my dad was a pollution control officer in Chicago. Now that sounds like a cop. He wasn't. He worked for the Metropolitan Sanitary District.
Okay.
And his job was to go lift up manholes at all the different plants in Chicago and send down a stainless steel cup, put it in a glass jar, and bring it to the lab up on Irving Avenue.
Yep.
And these companies, instead of fixing what they were doing, were paying the fines,
Right.
right?
This is the cost of doing business.
Yeah, right. And they're like, well, we can either put in our own treatment plant, that ain't gonna work, or we can do new fill up. You know what? Let's just pay the ticket. You know,
Yep.
it's like the person
Yep.
who keep paying speeding tickets, but that eventually changed, right? The Clean
Yep.
Water Act, and you could put on a ballot now. We all know who won the last election. If he'd have run on saying, "I want to get rid of the Clean Water Act," at least that is in our heads in this country. Like, no, we can't have filthy ass water with
Right.
garbage, litter, and chemicals in it.
Right.
So on that point, that was my silver lining. Yeah, if we can, that did turn around, but that word's just got to get out that this is just as important in a different area, just as
Well, I
important.
mean, I think you bring up clean water, right? And so when that was passed, so that was like what, 70s, I think, 70,
Yeah.
like early 70s. That passed out in Congress like 98 to 2. And I don't know who the two dipshits that didn't vote for it, right? but like that was bipartisan because clean water and clean air, I mean, the Clean Air Act passed back then too. It's because like that should matter to all of us, right?
Right.
And sure, does that, stop some business from doing certain things, or is it going to cost a little bit more money because I got to have, this treatment plant that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay because that's what's great for the American people. That stuff is for all of us, right? And so, I think that we need to get back to, I call it the radical middle, like this idea again that these people, the majority of the United States care about clean air, they care about clean water, they care about public lands, they care about public wildlife. And so let's try to coalesce around that versus, I mean, there's going to be attempts to roll back the Clean Water Act. There already are, so that more businesses can, you could have more mining and more um, oil and gas development, which again, I'm not against that, but let's do it in a proper way. So Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring because rivers were on frickin' fire, like
Right.
let's
Yeah.
not, we don't need to go back there, right?
No, we don't want to go back there. The dailies had a problem. They kept dyeing the Chicago River green, but apparently it was safe. Apparently it was
Yeah,
safe.
yeah. Go swim there, right? I mean,
Yeah,
hopefully, I don't even know if you probably can now, but
I
like,
don't. I don't think
back then,
anybody.
definitely not.
I don't think anybody. I think they might do a couple tours of the city on a boat. But so I guess if that message is just like the message with habitat, with grasslands, with logging. I watched this really great podcast with the president of the American Loggers Association. And sometimes it's just a sentence that somebody says that, grabs you.
Yeah,
And he said, now you can't do anything about 100-mile-an-hour winds. That's obviously an unfightable fire. But with proper forest management, it wouldn't have been as bad. And that fire, or one fire like that, basically reverses 25 years of trying to clean our air up.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and it's I don't hear anybody at the tavern or in the tailgate talking about that.
Right.
So yeah, we just got to you got to just keep beating the drum and get it out there. I
Yeah, and I think we gotta. I being a public land manager has got to be one of the hardest jobs in the world. Like that's before any of this stuff happened in the last 3 months, right? I mean, I feel for all those people that lost their jobs,
Yeah,
but what now is that we're not going to be able to do as much on those public lands, right?
right.
And when I say their jobs are hard, it is because they don't have the money or the resources necessarily to do the job that we want to, but also these lands are set aside for multiple use, right? So that's for grazing, timber harvest, mining, hunting, fishing,
Right.
backpacking, mountain biking, all those different uses.
Yeah.
And to try to make everybody happy, I mean, come on, like that's a really hard thing for them to do. So what they have to do is they have to listen to all these different people and all these different kind of inputs and try
Yeah.
to do the best for everybody. That is probably not, perfect for everybody, but it's a path forward. And I mean, I can't say enough for those people that are on the front lines of conservation that now are going to be asked to do, more with less. And
Right.
and really, I hope, that again the people step up and push back. But they may witness, the deterioration of something that, I mean, these guys aren't making a ton of money, right? Like,
No,
that all that cuts, that wasn't causing a lot of savings.
there's a
That was
lot
more
more.
like
Yeah, there's a lot more. There's a lot better jobs to have in this country than working for the Park Service or the state or I
as
mean,
far as money, as far
yeah,
as money, but these people, the reason they have those jobs is because they love where they are and what they're
right.
doing, right? Like,
Yeah.
they get to be out there on the ground every single day and working, on conservation, working with people. God bless them because, that's not for everybody in this country. And so now, I worry, about the long-term effects. Like if, you're in college right now, do you want to go into that field? And I would say, hell yeah, because we're going to need you even more because of the
Yeah.
purge that's happened.
Yeah, and maybe it'll be a private sector version of that job that could still work on the public lands or who, I mean, maybe is there a possibility that they would ever, what is it called when they privatize, like
Oh
privatize a
yeah,
prison, that if we could make a deal with them, I'll tell you what, don't sell it. We'll come up with a company that'll take care of it.
right.
Anything besides putting concrete on top of it.
Divesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Once they put, like I said before, once they put concrete on top of it or change the rules and it's gone, it's gone, gone, gone.
Well, that's the way, honestly, because these agencies have been defunded and like understaffed, That's a lot of the way conservation delivery has been happening. And either that's
Right,
in conjunction with the Elk Foundation, Mule Deer Foundation, Pheasants Forever, etc.,
right,
and or private entities or a combination of the both. Like
right.
that's how shit's been getting done on the ground. And so, and those funds were frozen and some still have not been released. I mean, can you imagine being like a logger here in Montana that's getting ready? We're just coming out of the winter, and so they're starting to think about, how they're gonna like, run their business.
Yeah.
They saw these big contracts and they're like, well, I'm gonna like buy this like, logging whatever it is, like tools. And now that stuff's been frozen and they're sitting on all, all of this money that they just invested and they can't go out and do the work. So not only, are they gonna suffer individually, but then that habitat on the ground, as you described, we need to be actively managing a lot of these forests, and that's just not gonna happen.
Yeah, because they got to work with that state agency. And if the state agency is underfunded, understaffed, they're not even going to have a time to have a meeting with a logger. They're not
No,
even,
or approve timber sales. Who's gonna go out there and approve timber sales when you fight all the people that were supposed to approve those?
and yeah, and that alone, in fact, I'll be doing a podcast in a few weeks with uh, some of the RGS timber managers from
Yeah,
Wisconsin and Michigan. And the hoops they got to jump through before this happened,
yeah,
it's like opening a door in mazes to get to the right person, to get to the right meeting.
yeah.
And then I felt like last time I talked about this, I think last October with RGS, it was kind of getting better because like RGS, PF, DU, Delta, like they're all kind of showing up and those names are getting familiar with those federal
Totally,
employees, those federal departments. And
totally.
now we're going to kill the federal department. That's going to hurt all the guys. If we want to just say, oh, the bird hunters aren't too worried about it. Yeah, we should all be worried about it because our organizations can't go there and even come up with a new plan. They
Right.
can't even think about doing it. Yeah.
And this is part of this dismantle. Like that's that big D dismantle is
Yeah.
that you break it and then you're like, oh, well, we can't manage it. Let's transfer it to the states. Well,
Hmm.
then the states get it or a private entity, but let's say the states get it. How are they going to pay for fire management? How are they going to pay for road maintenance? They're not going to be able to do it. They can't extract enough to be able to do that. And so they're going to freaking have to sell it. And like that, we
There,
never get that stuff back. And, here in Montana, there was a legislation this year, like, well, they started this last fall where they're leasing state lands to developers. And so they don't have to buy them outright, but then they develop them with housing, let's say. And then once they're the state will give that to them. And then they sell that, to like the highest bidder after that, right? And so
yeah.
it's already happening at a state level. And there's multiple examples of that.
Yeah.
Why would we do that? Again, affordable housing, I think we need to be thinking about it in that FLIPFA, where the money stays in that certain account for public land.
Yeah.
I think that's the way to do it and at a small, small scale. But the idea that we're going to do that to balance the budget is just
Yeah. That's
absolutely crazy to me.
right. There's a whole lot of other things we need to do on the country's behalf
Oh,
before
yeah.
before we do that to balance the budget. Like you said, that's
Well,
like we were talking before we hit record. That's like picking up the dog poop in the yard and expecting it to not be there the next day.
totally, totally, totally,
It's
totally.
like, God damn it, there's another pile of shit.
But I thought we got rid of that, right? Like I thought we got that all done.
We didn't get rid of it. But
No,
yeah, yeah. And we don't want to get rid of the dogs and we don't want to get rid of the public land. Yeah, yeah,
no, I might start using that analogy. I like it. I think, and I'll go back. Why are we messing with this $1 trillion outdoor economy, right? Like with the T, that's a huge influx
right,
of cash that is not only sustainable, but something that we can grow if we take care of it, right? It's
right,
like,
right,
why would you divest that when you know that it's going to give you benefits for, decades,
right.
centuries to come for a short-term gain or a short-term kind of payoff? Like it just, like to me, it's super short-sighted. And so it's not about, I think balancing the budget, it's more about, providing opportunities for people to have their little, slice of America, and, put money in people's pockets.
Yeah. Jeez.
And very few, by the way. Again, that's not you and I.
No,
That's
no.
somebody else.
Yeah, I'm not going to be putting a bid in on it. No.
No.
It's something, it's related, but it's just a sidebar that just popped into my head. When I got to meet Governor Matt Mead in Wyoming,
Yeah.
how I don't want to say it was his administration. I'm sure he had a lot of help in the department,
Yep.
but how they got the ranchers and the oil and everybody to work together for the bird, for the sage grouse,
Yeah,
right?
great example.
Instead of kind of same thing, instead of listing it, they could have said, they could have tapped out. They said, oh, okay. They saw what the ramifications could be just in their state.
Totally.
And they made it work. They're like, okay, we can do both. We don't, it doesn't have to go one way, you know.
Totally.
And
Totally. And I think that's that solution that I think lasts through time, right? It's like a
yeah,
compromise
yeah.
that sometimes is like a dirty word, but compromise is really how you do life, you know? I mean, I'm guessing you compromise once in a while with your wife. I definitely do with mine. Um,
It was about
and
an hour ago when I ate the grapes out of the back refrigerator instead of the old ones that were in the kitchen. Okay.
how dare you?
How
But
dare
you're like, okay, got you, you know, lesson learned. Um, I mean, you bring up ranchers, right? Like, so on Bureau of Land Management lands, on, you know, Forest Service lands where they graze, they pay $1.35 an animal unit month, which basically means, you know, that's like how they like determine grazing.
Right,
At a state level, that jumps up to $10. At a private level, that goes over 20, almost all the way up to $30. And
right.
so $1.35, which I think we could think about raising, but it
Hey,
also keeps these ranchers in business because it's a great way for them, you know, to help them with their operation. But
right.
let's change that to private, and all of a sudden they're paying $30 versus, you know, a
And
dollar 35.
there goes grazing.
They're done. They're
Yeah.
done. And there goes these big ranches, these traditional ranches. And so, you know, I think that ranchers have a huge stake in what's going on. And sure, could some ranchers buy a bunch of this Bureau of Land Management land for themselves?
Couple.
Absolutely. But there's going to be a bunch of folks that are not going to be able to do that, and they're going to go out of business. And I think that's a tragedy. And again, you know, how do you sustain that? Well, you make sure that, you know, that they're paying whatever allotment fee that costs, and maybe you could raise that, but that they, you know, pay that over time so they get a good deal versus like, you know, having to go into the private sector.
Yeah, the an analogy to that would be if the state of Michigan said, "Look, we're going to have to raise the small game license. If you want to keep hunting grouse, we're going to have to raise it." And a lot of people would go, "Oh, come on. It's
Right.
always been $25, right?"
Right.
But the option is if they said in that same sentence, or in about 15 years, you're not grouse hunting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll pay. Those
Yeah.
ranchers, I'm not saying the ranchers are going to pay the private, but if that could be part of a solution, that keeps those ranchers going. It keeps the ranchers go to, we all go. I mean, I don't get the big, I'm not a big game hunter. I've hunted a couple things, big game,
Yeah.
but I'm not shooting enough birds to feed my family, and it's just my wife and I now. I
Yeah.
go, no, I don't want that to happen. Just for the price of beef, I don't want that to happen. I mean,
Totally.
if for no other reason, don't fuck with the public lands because the price of beef is going to triple. I mean,
Great. Like, so I was talking about, you know, like how they had to pay individually, but way to break it down to actually the people are going to be consuming that beef because
us,
operation costs are going to go up. Well, what
right,
do? Then you raise prices, right? That's a
right,
great point.
yeah, yeah. It's sad state of affairs, but like I said, I've not joined more groups, but I guess my shine or my silver lining is a little bit when I run into people that are in their 30s and 40s,
Yeah.
they are at least familiar now with the terms Pittman Robertson and public land and bureau. Like my group wasn't, you know,
Totally.
at least that group, and probably I'm sure a lot of that to whatever the level of BHA's membership is. The people that joined BHA in such fast numbers, they were those young people, mostly young. You know, I'm saying it's
Yeah. Yeah.
probably 40-something-year-old average, but lots of young ones.
Yeah.
And a few old timers jumped in, you know, and it's like there's a bigger portion of us that know that this is the right thing to do, where 40 years ago, you couldn't have got my attention. And so maybe there is hope. Maybe there is, you know, that we can make. Somebody said that it doesn't take that many calls to your congressman or your senator to where you might not talk to them, but it'll get to them, right? If Is
Phone
that
calls are the best thing to do. They like are absolutely, if you can't talk to these folks in person, which is like I would say that's even better. So
yeah,
either out in Washington, D.C. or when they're back in your home state.
right,
But like you can make a phone call, and what happens is you get that person at the front desk like 9 times out of 10. And that person at the front desk, hey, thanks, Ron. Like, tell me what your issue is. You say, man, I want you to make sure that you keep public lands in public hands and do not use them to balance the budget.
right,
Thank you. Okay, where are you from? Oh, blah blah blah. And then they're like well, they take some notes and they're making checks, right, on an issue related thing. I've heard from 15 people today, and they all said keep public lands in public hands. Then they're going and reporting that to their boss, and their boss then gets to make a decision. Is this an issue that I want to be on one side of or the other side
right,
of? And our job as the people is to provide that pressure or
yeah,
that information. Maybe the better way to say that is provide that information, and so they can make decisions on how they represent us as the people.
yeah,
And if they don't do that, that's where kind of American hunters and anglers comes in, and we slap them publicly. And then they either change their tune, or that hopefully they get, they don't get elected in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years, whatever it is.
yeah, yeah. Well, before we run out of places to hunt, how was your hunting season?
My
Because
hunting season was good. I got in a bad car wreck like 7 years ago, and like didn't have like too many problems with it. And then with this extra time, I really started hitting the gym, and it was awesome. Lost a bunch of weight, was feeling strong, but like I overdid it, and my left shoulder just acted up, and so I had to stop shooting my bow. I had to like really think about how I had to do my PT every single day, like carrying, I've got a Frankie over and under, like lightweight, like little, like awesome 12 gauge.
yeah.
And even carrying that in the field, like was hard on me. And so like you asked
Oh,
me how my hunting season was, like I feel embarrassed. Like again, like I have plenty of more years in front of me, but I just didn't pay attention to my body enough for a little bit. And it took me 6 months. I'm finally feeling, I can sleep at night again, which is great. But, I killed, a bunch of mountain grouse early, and then got into waterfowl. I had a great waterfowl season. That's a little bit easier. You can sit in the blind. I
yeah,
do some
yeah,
walking and kind of jump shooting, but a lot
yeah,
of that was sitting in the blind, which I could do. And then by the time big game season rolled around, I could put my rifle on my shoulder, and I killed a nice little whitetail, or two whitetails actually. And so I got meat in the freezer. I did do some pheasant hunting, and shot a few pheasants, and then got into the hunts pretty good this year as well.
yeah.
Um,
I had friends that left North Dakota and drove to Montana. Now,
yeah,
it was Eastern Montana.
yeah.
Yeah, apparently things were good. I mean, you guys must have got the weather right
The
or something.
numbers were great. Like the weather wasn't bad in the spring, which I think is probably the biggest limiting factor. I mean, you got
Mhm.
habitat, which is probably the number one factor if you got
Yeah,
good habitat, right? But then
yeah,
that spring, when those spring rains come, if those chicks have just hatched and like we get a good rain and it's cold,
yeah,
like you're in trouble. But this
yeah,
last year, it was
yeah,
a lot more mild and it was good. So
yeah.
my hunting season was good. I think my son is he just turned 14, and so my kind of this next hunting season is really going to be getting him on birds and getting him on a
Yeah.
deer hopefully, and maybe a turkey, and so I'm looking forward to that. It'll be less of my season and more of his season this next year, which is perfectly okay with me.
Something I've never said. I had three daughters that didn't, well, they hunted a little bit with me, but it was never like, hey, Dad, can I get a deer this year? That I never had to face that. I never had the son stealing my boots and taking my gun. And
The stealing the boots thing, dude, like his feet, like I wear tens, and like he just is like at a 9.5, and so he's starting to steal my stuff. And I'm
yeah,
like, now I got to get doubles of everything, right? And that's like,
yeah,
which again, I am happy to do because it means that we're getting out in the field together.
yeah,
And he is my, I mean, outdoor buddy. My daughter too, though. I mean, she doesn't hunt, but she fishes and like can like, either fly fish or conventional tackle. Like she picks up a rod, and it's like it's been there her entire life, which is
yeah.
pretty fun for me to see.
He's they're outdoors people. I mean,
Outdoors people, yeah, they get it. Though my son thinks that he's a bit more of an outdoorsman than my daughter because he thinks he's tougher. But that's just
yeah,
I think
but
being close.
he's the younger brother too.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah, I
exactly.
feel sorry for her. I'm glad we didn't do that to our twin girls. We gave him a younger daughter to pick on, so we didn't have that problem.
Yeah. Now, my
Well,
family when I grew up, it was I was the firstborn, and then my sister was 3 years younger than me, and then I have another sister that's 10 years younger than me. And so that one in the middle got it from both sides. It
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
like the two were picking on the little one. It was like me basically utilizing the 10-year-old to mess around with the middle one.
The Tawney the tawdry tales of the Tawney family.
Have you ever run across my sister Whitney? She used to work for Ducks Unlimited, and then she was working for Montana Conservation Voters here for the last 7 years. But she was out in DC working for Ducks Unlimited for a long time. And
So
I
your
always
whole
tell people she's smarter, better looking, and more motivated than me.
damn, damn.
You know, but better looking, it's not hard, right? I mean, we
Well, the
talked about
better look.
our gap
Yeah,
teeth,
I was gonna let that go. I was gonna let that go. I was gonna say any woman should be better looking than Land. But so real quick, I thought I remembered. Was your dad in the same kind of what do you want to call it, land management and like
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
kind of like a family thing, right? Isn't
It
it?
is. So my mom and my dad were the first full-time conservation lobbyists at the state legislature here in
That's
Montana.
that's what I heard. Yeah.
And then my dad went to law school late in life, like at 35. And once he
Wow.
got out of law school, this is when conservation easements were starting to kind of be a thing, private land and making sure those private landowners can, like preserve their legacy, I guess I would say, and in that
Yeah.
open space and kind of the way it is. So he
Yeah.
worked a lot on that. And then he was the first lawyer for the Elk Foundation too. So the Elk Foundation started, he wrote their articles of incorporation, their bylaws, and that was in 1985. And then he passed away at the young, ripe age of 45 in
Oh,
1995.
wow.
Um, but yeah, my parents, my mom, like still is involved in conservation.
Yeah.
And so it's been a family affair, I would say.
Yeah, it's like being born into a bricklaying family in Wisconsin. Like you're gonna be a bricklayer someday, Land.
What the thing about that too is that I don't think I was that interested. I think it was osmosis, I was around all these meetings, I was around late night conversations, I could like, but I never took much interest to it. But then once my father passed away, I was 19. That's when this all kind of like this fire kind of started inside of me. Where, my daughter in particular, man, she lives and breathes kind of conservation and politics, and she really understands it.
That's great.
And at, 16 going on 17, like that was not me, man.
No, I couldn't even spell conservation at 16. Probably still can't without a little scratch paper.
Little cheat sheet, do a couple,
Little cheat
little
sheet.
autocorrect, right? Little autocorrect helps out these
Thank
days.
God. Thank God. Well, anything like so for people to get involved, I mean, are
Yep,
you looking for email addresses so more
totally.
people can,
So
and
you
it's
asked
not
this earlier, and I didn't quite. I mean, this is what happens with me is I start talking and then I forget to answer things.
oh, me,
But
me
no
too.
membership, no like chapters. We're doing that for a couple of reasons. One, we don't want to compete with our sister organizations, right?
Mhm.
The other thing of that is that's a lot to manage on its own, right? And I know
Right,
that very well at BHA. We started pretty small and then we grew to
right.
40,000 members, and that's much different than 1,000.
Yeah.
So no memberships, no corporate partners, but we do want to get people's emails. And so the easiest way to find us right now is nolandgrab.com. So I think everybody can like figure out, or just
Remember
American Hunters and Anglers. You can Google that. But
Yeah.
nolandgrab.com will get you there. And it's crazy that we got that.
Yeah,
that,
no
that,
way. It's funny when you sent me that because I had your old email address,
yeah.
and when I read it without any separation, was
You're like, what the hell is that?
I thought it was Nolan Grab, and I thought it was like, oh, is his wife a lawyer for Nolan and Grab? I did, but yeah, then I looked at, I'm like, oh, no land. The only thing better could have had no effing land grab.
That would have been even better.
That would have
But
been
no, I
even
think
better.
so people that's our website, and people can sign up for more information there. We sent out a press release today on what's going on around
Yeah.
this balancing the budget kind of idea. And then the really the day to day though is on Instagram, and so that's just American Hunters and Anglers.
Okay.
And we're putting out content. I haven't talked about Brinja yet, but there's this woman Bryn Merkley who used to work for Nike. She's done a couple political campaigns. She's our guru, I would say. It's Ninja plus her first name Bryn. We call her Brinja. She's the one that's like behind our social media. And like I will tell her, you can already tell on this podcast, I'm a little verbose sometimes when I'm talking, and I'll give her like 3 paragraphs of something that I want to say, and she'll break that down into a script that's like not want to give away all our secrets, but I think
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
important for people to know. It's like you got to have a hook, you got to
Yep.
have kind of this call to emotion in the middle, and you got to have a call to the action at the end. And
Yeah.
like she is just so good at that. Like I sent her one this morning. that she turned around literally in like 15 minutes and it was freaking gold, man. And so like she is so fun to work with. But our social media is pretty fun and engaging. You should check out the one we did on the crap strap yesterday for April Fools. You ever heard of
Crap.
a crap strap?
No, no. Oh,
Well,
not
I'll give you this
the,
the short 30 seconds or
yeah.
whatever, minute. But like everybody's got to poop in the woods, right? Like at some
Yep.
point, if you spend enough time out in the woods, you're gonna have to poop.
Oh, okay. Now I'm picking it up.
And so, there's lots of techniques. You can squat, which, I'm at 50 now. If I get down like squatting, I'm not coming up if I'm down there for very long, or I'm going to fall backwards, God forbid, into that
Yeah.
poop. Then there's like the sit on the log kind of technique where you kind of put your ass on the edge of the log and like that works, but you're going to get splinters potentially up your butt.
Yep.
Then there's like I like this is one I've used a lot is where I grab onto a tree and I grab onto that branch and I lean back. But then you got sap on your hands, right? And like try to wipe with like sap on your hands. And so the crap strap, which my kids and I actually did a video 10 years ago, is basically a cam strap through a pool noodle. And so then you put the pool noodle kind of like in your small of your back. And so you got
Yeah.
that lumbar support. Then you
Yeah.
hook that cam strap around that tree. And you can adjust that for any size tree, any size human. And so we did this yesterday as just like a farce. But there's a ton of people that actually want to buy it. And I'm like, well, I can give you the schematics, which is basically what I just told you, is you get a pool noodle, you run a cam strap through it, and you put it around a tree. But that was kind of fun. So what I'm trying to say is that, we're being real serious about this shit that's in front of us when it comes to public lands and public wildlife and public water. But we're also trying to have some fun while we do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm excited. I'll expect maybe whenever you think it's right, whenever you guys get a few battles under your belt and come back on and give us an update in 6 months or something.
I'd love to do that, Ron. And I think that, you know, what's happened in the last 3 months is like almost years worth of shit. And so
Yeah.
like I'm
Yeah.
stoked that we've been like a part of that. And it's just the beginning. And then, and we didn't talk about this much, but we really want to, make sure that in this next election cycle that public lands, public waters, public wildlife is in that radical middle where politicians from both sides of the aisle are like, we are for that and we're not going to mess with it. And I think then
All
we're
right.
going to know that we're winning. And for those that are against that, they got to lose their jobs, and that helps teach a lesson just like that.
Yeah, and that's really, if you think about it that simply, it shouldn't be that hard to do. It's so common sense. Like you could get people in a city to support clean air, clean water, public, like just the sentence to be like, well,
Totally,
yeah, well, sure,
totally.
yeah,
You gotta let them know how their people, are voting and what they stand for. And I think that's,
I-
like again, a lot of people are tuned out from that. And how do you, we're trying to do that in 60, 90 seconds on social media that's entertaining so they can learn something.
yeah. Well, I'll keep it up. I'll follow it,
Thank
and
you.
I'll pass it on to all my stuff, and we'll see if we can't boost that up a bit. Um,
Boost it.
I had this was my corny idea a year ago. And you
Let's
can
hear it.
tell me it's never going to work. There, I want a sticker, and I don't care if it's got an S for sportsman or an H for habitat or whatever it's got, that every person, I don't care if you're a kayaker, a fisherman, a hunter, whatever, like we could all live with that sticker on our bumper. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't mean I'm a hunter. It just means
Yep,
I use it.
totally.
And
Or
it
like
doesn't
a
have to say,
CW for clean water or something, right?
yeah, but just like when you go by somebody, you're like, oh, there's a brother, there's a sister, you
Yeah.
know?
I actually love the idea, and I think that, it's we've talked about this radical middle, but I would also talk about like all the different user groups, right? Like so,
Oh,
the
yeah.
hikers, the mountain bikers, the
Right.
kayakers, the hunters, the anglers. We share, I mean, I do a lot of that stuff anyways, right? Like, I mountain bike, I don't kayak, but I raft and stuff all the time. Um, we do a lot of the same things, and to find some place that's unified, I actually, I thought you were gonna come up with some real weird shit, but I think that actually makes sense.
Well, it stems from now this is a rabbit hole. It stems from uh back in the day when a lot of people in this country in the 1800s, early 1900s for sure, were all Masons, right? I mean,
Yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah,
very common. And
yeah.
I remember my aunt telling me about I ended up becoming one later in life. So I was a late onset Mason, right? I didn't start when I was 20, when I was 21. But how and anybody who was back in that day, they would have this a little emblem on their bumper or in their window, right?
Totally.
If my aunt said if your Uncle Virgil had a flat tire, now she's going back into the 40s and 50s. She
Yeah.
goes, he had a flat tire. Within 5 minutes, somebody was pulling over that was from a lodge, his lodge, another lodge, or an out-of-state lodge, and helping him change the flat tire.
Yeah.
Like there was an emblem that identified you as a, let's say, as well, as a Mason, but as what it stood for. And like, what would that symbol look like? That like when you bought a gun, you get the sticker. When you buy a fishing rod, when you buy your bicycle,
Totally.
and pretty soon all of a sudden, like, holy cow, we all got red S's or whatever it is, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, I'll let you work on that because I know you're just not busy enough.
Okay, so you're just the idea guy, and then you got to
I'm
find an
just
implementer, right? Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just like one of the show writers, you know, for Seinfeld. I just, all the jokes come from me, but you just don't know it. Yeah.
I mean, I love the idea, and I almost like as I'm sitting here, when I was at BHA, the Bundys took over the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, if you remember that, right?
Yeah.
Like they took
Yep.
it over by force, even though nobody was there, right? And I think they were
Right.
there for 60 plus days, whatever it was, but they were talking about how we wanted to return that land to the people. And I was like, what? Like that land, it's a national wildlife refuge. That already belongs to all of us.
Right. Yeah.
Where we kind of came up with this like public landowner like slogan. And
Right.
so that idea of like you could put a sticker and maybe it's like PLO or something, right? Because that kayaker, that mountain biker, that hunter, that angler, every single American is really, a public landowner, but the ones that would really care about it are the ones that are using it. So maybe
Right.
that's what, maybe that's
And
a thing
then,
for BHA, or maybe that's, I stand on alone.
yeah. And with that sticker comes an email. And with that email comes information. With that
So,
information comes a voice. Yeah.
yep. And I think, I appreciate you like, wanting to use your voice more. And I would really, really, for the people that are listening to this, that idea of engaging in this, that's the only way we're going to have any
Right.
opportunity to preserve what we
Right.
have right now or make it better. And
Yeah.
phone calls are the absolute best. Like emails, they're easy to do, and especially the form ones, you just push send. But that phone call, it might seem like it's scary at first, but go ahead and do that. And once you
I've
get to
done
do
it.
it a couple times,
Yeah.
you know that it's not as scary anymore. But like they're keeping score of that, and I think it's super effective.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll give you a little more help on the emblem. We got to come up with it. It goes, and we're going to make every gun manufacturer, knife, backpack. I don't care if it's the guy who makes, paracord.
Yeah,
Everybody that buys the stuff that one of us uses, we get this little, doesn't have to be gaudy.
yeah,
We just have to know what it means, you
yeah.
know?
I
And
love it too, because like when you show up with that trailhead, right? Like,
yeah,
you might not share, you
I might
know,
not be a BHA guy. I might be a Trout Unlimited guy,
totally, totally.
but we're
What's
all
the unifying message, right?
for all that red. I said the red S because of Superman and sportsman, but you got to take sportsman out of it because, I don't think a biker thinks of themselves as a sportsman.
Totally,
But
totally.
yeah, maybe PLO though publicly. It sounds like PLO, Palestinian Liberation. We gotta massage this a little bit,
I
Lance.
think, I think, we need to get together and we need to have a little bit of bourbon and sit down and really, really figure this out.
It might be just like one letter, just like whatever
Yeah,
it is. We don't know what it'll be.
yeah. I love it.
It
I love it.
might be L, but not because of you.
But then that's like self-serving,
I
right? Like,
know. All right. All right, Land. It's been great chatting with you. I want everybody to pay attention. Go to American Hunters and Anglers. Get on it. Make the phone calls. We got to turn the bus. It's hard to turn a bus around sometimes, but um, it's either that or the bus has got no brakes. And pretty
yeah, or
soon,
the bus runs us over, right? Like, and I
oh,
think we the people still have a voice. We just got to use it.
that might be WTP. WTF, WTP.
That's
We're
close to real close to WTF, which might not work.
which they're all going to think, we listen to a certain, yeah. Anyway. All right, Land, this has been
Great to
fun.
talk to you.
Always fun. And I miss seeing you at the things, but I'm sure our paths are going to cross again.
They will. They will. I'm confident in that.
All right, buddy. We'll see
All
you.
right. Yep. See ya.
Bye.